Welcome, viewers, to the third in a series of interviews with Dr. Bogdan Kotnis. We're doing our best. I'm your moderator, Bob Terzian, by the way, and just let you know we're doing our best to compress our interviews into 15-minute segments, so stay with us. And Bogdan will continue to give you details of the Polish perspective on the current global crisis. Poland's grown impressively in the last 30 years, and this has transformed Poland from an insignificant to a principal subject of European geopolitics. Looking at their perspective helps us to clarify what we see developing in Europe and the world. So welcome, Bogdan.
Thank you, Bob, and welcome to all you viewers who have decided to tune in, especially those who have shared our interviews with our contacts. We'd like to have as many of people in the US view us, of course. So thank you again.
So Bogdan, some of our viewers want to know your take on Putin's recent interview. What do you want to say about it? Tell us as quickly and succinctly as you can.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's had over 200 million views from what I understand globally. But as far as I'm concerned, the interview, first of all, was intended not to share any insight with us. It was intended to promote both Putin and the interviewer and not elicit any meaningful information. Second, it's a sham. It was a stage act without meaning or substance, intended to distract and confuse and focus us away from what really matters right now for all of us globally. I believe it diverted attention from the meaningful issues as we have been coping with Russia's 10-year-long war in Ukraine and their continued threats to world peace globally. And I think that we should focus on Putin's war crimes and the sudden death of anyone who crosses him, than focus on his ramblings.
So the interview was an attempt to present Putin as one of our civilized world community leaders, would you say?
You're right. It was an attempt to present Putin as one of the recognized leaders of our civilized world community that we had all created by consent and compromise after the horrors of World War II. I think it tries to legitimize Putin's murderous and avaricious nature, which honestly is typical of Russian leadership. I believe they're still locked in the colonial mindset of territorial conquest, where Russia, the largest country in the world, still craves even more land through deceit, coercion, blackmail, and bloodshed. I don't see any democracy, and I don't see any dialogue. It is just a brutal force they're applying systematically. So all of these reasons, I think, blurred together in this interview, which is like an unsavory cocktail of manipulations and innuendo, dragging us away from the search to stop the Russian-made bloodshed and violence in Ukraine, but also in Asia and Africa. But on the other hand, the interview taken as a whole is an example of how propaganda is generated and used to achieve its goals.
So I think you're saying that the interview was a sham because it was nothing more than a propaganda stunt.
Exactly. I think that we're spinning wheels right now, trying to guess what's behind that honestly just incoherent blurbs that we have heard from Putin. I don't think there's anything behind it. I think it's a sham because it diverts our attention away from what the world should be focusing on right now, which is how to stop Russia and how to stop Putin and put him behind bars where he belongs as a war criminal. It is a waste of time and focus to debate the details of the interview and Putin's particular take on some fragments of history or his motivation. Our involvement in the interview keeps Putin front and center of the world, which is exactly what he wants. So I see this interview as Putin's attempt to sound reasonable, as he's trying to manipulate facts to divert our attention from his criminal acts and from his ongoing aggression. He picked up Eastern European and Russian history exactly because most of Westerners know precious little about all these facts.
Amen.
So quarreling who was sitting behind an oak tree somewhere around Moscow 500 years ago makes no sense to what's going on today. So again, quarreling and dissecting his interview, which is pure pro-Putin propaganda, would be swallowing his bait and would turn us into useful idiots, legitimizing him as a global opinion maker that I hope he's not. And that should not be our purpose.
Well, that's pretty damning praise. Basically, the interview was a stage act to benefit Putin.
Exactly, Robert. I think that the sooner we move it behind us, the better. There's so many important issues at hand that we should be focusing on. But I think that this is kind of like a round that Putin's won in a way. So what he did, he chose what Russian hybrid warfare specialists call a useful idiot to interview him. And Putin is using this interview to convince the world that his invasion of Ukraine was historically justified and that he is the master of all history, all military strategy, the best informed, the strongest, and the most victorious of all leaders. So our presidents, all the world leaders, look like children compared to this omniscient saint from Moscow. And I believe that arguing with Putin's lies is exactly what he wants. Again, this is the way to lead us away from the focus we should be right now thinking about.
So I think you've previously mentioned that Poles have a unique perspective and they can see through Putin's trickery. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's an old game. We've seen it for generations, for hundreds of years. There's really nothing new in their arsenal. So yes, Poles recognize this useful idiot interview technique as a form of hybrid warfare intended to confuse, create internal conflict, instill doubt, and divert us away from formulating a winning strategy. We're all the time, when we're talking about Russia, we're afraid of them. And I really don't know why. We just afraid of speaking clearly because they can get mad at us. And I believe that the Ukrainian war itself is a diversion of sorts. Russia wants a proxy war with the United States, just as it tried us in Syria, for example. It wants to challenge our global standing, test the resolve of our citizens, and win our retreat, as in Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. So in a way, Putin taunts us to follow his meanders of historical fiction while he, as a typical serial killer in some horror movie, commits more crimes. He fired this friendly interview missile into our midst to bait our politicians and media into an even more internal squabble and division, and put us in a deep trance and focus on our own internal differences. We will not rise on time to stop Russian aggression in Ukraine and in many other fronts, including the Middle East and Africa, where the Russians are actively engaged in warfare as we speak.
So you said that Putin is a murderous serial killer. He regularly eliminates his opposition and is unfriendly to journalists, imprisons them, and so forth. Can you be any more specific about how that plays out?
The list is so long, and I wish that one day we had some international court go point by point and just really put it all for us in a nice package. We don't have it yet so far, but while he drew the world's attention to his unprecedented interview, look at what happened to his principal political opponent, Alexei Navalny. He suddenly died. And I remember the Hills News cited the Russian Federal Prison Service reporting that Navalny collapsed during a walk and was unable to be resuscitated. And then a little later, I found that Navalny's mother went to claim his body, but it was nowhere to be found. And remember, it was before what happened to Navalny was he barely survived an attack by the Soviet nerve agent, only because his family airlifted him to Berlin. And then when he returned to Russia, a true patriot in most eyes, Putin's courts put him in jail for 10 years. And then they extended that for an additional 19 years. And then eventually they sent him to the harshest remote prison in the Yamal Peninsula, way up the Russian north. And note, Putin did not have any interviews about it. He didn't oppose his opponent. He did not ramble for hours about Navalny, but he simply had Navalny killed in cold blood. So that's a typical Putin way of taking care of business.
Are there any more examples that we can identify of the Putin regime's murderous activity?
Remember that Putin's vocal critic, Alexander Litvinenko, he was a former FSB officer, and he died of radioactive polonium-210 poisoning in England in 2006. And in the same year, Anna Politkovskaya, she was a journalist who filed reports critical of Putin and his buddy, Ramzan Kadyrov, who is Putin's appointed Chechen absolute ruler, the ruler of life and death in Chechnya. So Anna Politkovskaya was shot dead in the elevator of her apartment block. And then in 2013, Boris Berezovsky, he was one of the oligarchs, one of the guys that actually worked with Putin, but he turned against Putin, feeling safe in London, and he was found hanged in his bathroom in London. Then we have, I think the biggest one is 2015, Boris Nemtsov. He was a former deputy prime minister under Boris Yeltsin, and he was slated to be the president of Russia, actually. And I've listened to interviews with Boris Nemtsov for hours, and I was so impressed with him intellectually. And he was asked many times, "Are you not afraid that Putin's going to kill you?" And I remember just months before his assassination, he said, "Yeah, my mom just told me today that I should watch it." Well, I watch it all the time, but we cannot be afraid of our own shadow. So he was shot dead on the sidewalk in front of the Kremlin as he was walking hand in hand with his girlfriend. And then, strangely, all hundreds of cameras that are around the Red Square were turned off. There was only one camera to show only one angle where the shooting was behind a car. And then there was 2023, the latest, Yevgeny Prigozhin died in a spectacular plane crash. He was the head of the Wagner paramilitary group deployed in Ukraine, but also they operated in Africa and Asia. And Prigozhin protested the absence of critical provisions for his soldiers. And quite honestly, it's a typical, again, Russian murder of guys who at a certain time were used for some dirty criminal deeds. And are all these just unfortunate coincidences or systematic, cold-blooded political assassinations?
Well, it certainly sounds like they are methodical. Um, have you described everything that he's done?
Well, as I said before, I mean, not by a long shot. These are only the most notorious ones. And we have only so much space and time here, and honestly, so little insight into this closed Russian nation. It's the largest nation in the world, but who's been there and what have we seen? And if you go there with a microphone and start asking questions, they're going to put you behind bars or going to send you away. There's no way that you could go and really find out what's going on in Russia. You know, it's a closed society, maybe not to the level of North Korea, but for a second, don't think that it's an open democratic society. And you know what? I'm just going to tell you. I listened to an interview once with Putin's own wife, who left Russia, and it's been on taken a few times, but I remember she called him a vampire and the bloodsucker. For me, Putin is no better than the infamous Serbian leader Radovan Karadzic or the African Adi Amin or Hitler or Stalin or Muammar Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein, to name just a few. We have quite a large number of these guys. And why are we talking about the recent so-called interview of a man charged with war crimes and who the world knows is a serial murderer and foreign invader? It just, I don't get it.
So, what's the basis for saying that he's guilty of war crimes?
Technically, from what I understand, he has yet not been finally convicted, but the International Criminal Court, the ICC, has issued a warrant for his arrest for unlawful deportation of population. They mean children, and unlawful transfer of children from occupied areas of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. We're talking about thousands of kids put on trucks, trains, and just kidnapped. And again, it's an old Mongolian and Russian strategy to train children into the fighters who then going to fight their own families. And the ICC believes they can prove it at this point in the court of law. So they want him arrested. And of course, he's not going to leave Russia. He's going to sit there and continue what he's doing. But this is only the tip of the iceberg of Putin's crimes, from which he wants to divert our attention. The United Nations has said that Russian forces in Ukraine are responsible for rapes, widespread torture, and killings. And if you just, click around, go to the news and see a list of his crimes that have been alleged, they're just unbelievable. And they're certainly too many, too numerous to list here. And then there are many murders we hardly even hear about. But, just a short list that comes to mind. March 2022. So it's just a month after they launched their attack on Ukraine with brutal, lethal force. Russian forces carried out an airstrike on a theater in Mariupol, which was sheltering children, and attacked a hospital in the city. And a month later, April 2022, the bodies of 400 civilians were found in Bucha near Kiev. And it actually stopped some beginning of peace talks between Ukrainians and the Russians, because Ukrainians saw the bodies. And then we have September 2022. Again, 450 bodies, mostly of civilians, were found in Izium, in the Kharkiv region. And the number of war crimes around there is just unbelievable. And then we have Ukraine, who accuses Russian forces of committing more than 400 war crimes in one region of Kherson region between March and November 2022. 22. And then, in addition, the United Nations again says that Russia could be responsible for crimes against humanity because it is attacking civilian infrastructure, such as power stations and dams. But again, the Russian strategies push on, continue killing, and hope that we're going to get used to it, and that we're going to start to kind of like put it in relation to the needs and whatever. No, we just need to look facts straight in the face, and it's just horrible what they're doing.
Well, thank you, Bogdan. I'm mindful of our time, and we've already been talking for 20 minutes. So I think that we should stop here and thank the viewers for showing up and talking to us. Also, hope that you'll continue to tune back in. We have a lot more. Bogdan has a great deal more to talk about. And don't forget to send us your comments. So thank you very much, Bogdan, for again providing an illuminating insight into the Polish perspective of these global affairs.
Thank you, Robert, and thank you all the viewers. And there is more to come if you decide to listen to us. And I promise to try and answer all the questions as honestly and straightforwardly as I can. Thank you, and see you soon.